Hi, this is Tim Selden from the Montessori Foundation. This is the Montessori Leadership Institute's weekly online webinar. This week we're continuing the conversation about building up enrollment and building up a sense of community. One of the things I want to review is the 3 steps that are involved in getting people into the school. The first is you have to make the phone ring. So that's anything you do. I don't care if it's word of mouth. I don't care if it's email blast. I don't care if it's your website or search engine optimization. I don't care if it's print ads or TV ads or radio ads or billboards. All of them have been used very, very successfully by other schools. If you've listened to the recording of the first part of this talk last week, you should have heard and seen some of the TV spots that have been done. You should have heard some of the radio spots that have been done. You should have even seen a billboard. So what I want to begin with this week is the thought that, again, there are 3 steps just to making that initial sale. The first is make the phone ring, whatever you can do to make it ring. The second is qualify the customer, which means you don't want to waste a lot of time and energy on people who are just going to come to your school and frankly give you a hard time because you're not the kind of school they had in mind. What you want is to have a community of people who actually want to be involved in Montessori education. Now, most people when they come to us have young kids and they don't know. A few of them may actually have heard of Montessori, may have read about Montessori, may be intrigued by Montessori, and may really be committed to Montessori. Of course, that's not going to be everybody. In fact, I'm going to suggest it's probably not the majority of people. On the other hand, there are people who will come to your school and will become really argumentative or distrusting or discontented, and their discontent becomes infectious within your community. You really want people who want to be with you for the right reasons. That means, among other things, your school has to be clear and coherent and consistent, and you have to be doing what you say you're doing. You can't talk airy-fairy theory and then have your teachers doing something totally different. Don't overpromise, actually underpromise, surprise people. When you're working on admissions, I don't sell Montessori, and I don't even really sell my school. What I try to do is help people to understand why I love the school, and I give them permission to not love it. And that's part of the psychology. You really have to say to them something like, what we're going to build at Creo Montessori, that's Mariana's school, what we're going to build is something very different. This is not going to be your typical private school. It's not going to be your typical public school. It's not going to be like charter Montessori schools. It's going to be different. It's not going to be right for everybody. Let us tell you what it is that we dream. This is what we're doing and why we're doing it for our children as well as for other people who want to be part of this community. Or if you're running an ongoing school, you have to be clear about who you are and what you're doing. I just did that yesterday with a group of people here at Newgate. And again, the basic communication with visitors is Newgate is not right for everybody. It's a very special school. Those of us who love it really love it. We want our grandchildren to go here. What we would say to you as a prospective parent is this is one of the most important decisions you're ever going to make. This is your child they're talking about. And there are people who will put their child in any kind of school where the bathrooms don't stink, and you get the impression that the people at that school will love you. On the other hand, there are people that really are aware of what brain research shows about the importance of the first 6 years of life and the possibility of what a really high quality early childhood education can contribute to a child not only academically, but psychologically and socially, and in terms of self-confidence, an inner sense of order, a sense of concentration, and a feeling of wanting to be in charge of her own life, to be the master of her own will. That kind of drive, that kind of psychological state of being is incredibly useful for all people in the rest of their lives. We're looking for families that want something like that for their children. We're not going to try to change you. We're not going to try to sell you. We're not going to exaggerate or lie to you. What we're going to do is tell you and show you the truth. We're going to allow you to come back as often as you want. We're going to allow you to talk to present parents and to ask questions and to get a sense of what it's really like to be part of our school. We're looking for people who hopefully are going to be with us throughout their child's education, whose kids are going to graduate from high school here. We don't expect you today, coming for the first time, to have any sense of whether or not that would be something that you would want. We also realize that life changes and something might happen that would lead you or your child to want something different. Hopefully, what we'll do is help you to figure out whether, on a philosophical and instinctive level, what we're doing here feels like the perfect match for you. What I'm talking about there is called qualifying the customer. What you're doing there is not, you're obviously qualifying them if they say, how much do you all charge by the week? And you say, well, I'm sorry, our tuition is annual, but the answer to the question is $15,000 a year. And they basically hang up the phone on you. Well, you've just qualified your customer. Some people feel really awkward about money. They're embarrassed that they have to charge. They wish to all heaven that they didn't have to. My advice to you is, if you really don't want to charge anyone, go start a charter school. But on the other hand, charter schools are usually always strapped for money. And the ones that are halfway successful have got to do serious fundraising every single year to make it work, because the state doesn't give you enough money. So again, what we would say to you is money is part of every transaction. And not everyone is going to feel they can afford you or that you're worth it. You want to find people who feel that they can afford you and that you're worth it. And if you want to expand that market out, and I happen to personally believe in doing this rather liberally, we tend to set aside about a third of every dollar that comes in for needs-based financial aid. In other words, if there's a family we really want in the school, and on a legitimate evaluation of their finances that they can't afford it, we don't give it to them for free normally. We just can't afford that. But we certainly give away pretty significant financial aid. And about a third of our budget is going to that. Some people are getting a full ride. Some people are getting half ride. Some people are getting, a few thousand. Whatever it is, it helps. I would certainly tell you, don't set your tuition based on what you sense the average person can afford. Colleges often have tuition of $40,000, $50,000 a year. You've probably heard that most people who go to college don't pay the full freight. They, in one way or the other, get it reduced through scholarships, through financial aid, or through a work-study program of some kind. I would certainly encourage anybody to do that. The big thing is, this is not about filling seats. It is, but it isn't. Because if you just fill seats, they'll leave you as soon as they find something that they think is better. You need to find people who actually are going to love you for what you're doing, for what you can deliver today in your imperfect state of evolution. All of us are running schools that are evolving. They're either just starting up, or they're in phase one of the process of being formed, and They haven't put into place all the things that will come with phase 2, 3, 4, 5. No matter how good you are, it won't be good enough for some people. You need people who are going to love you, appreciate you for what you're doing right now. The last step of those three that I mentioned, by the way, and I'm sorry I don't have a slide for these particular things, the last step is this idea of closing the sale. And what I mean by that is you don't just passively wait for them to approach you. You don't try to argue with them or change their minds, but you certainly work aggressively to build a relationship. And some people might call that closing the sale. In my mind, what I'm doing there is working hard to build a real conversation, a real connectedness between that family and our school as an institution, and me as head of school or my staff that's doing it directly. It's all about tying people into a community. One last thing with that is I would highly recommend that you not hire an admissions director and delegate the job of admissions and recruitment to them. It's fine to have someone who helps you with admission if you've got a big enough school and you can justify the cost. But I don't care if you're Yale University. You want to be personally involved in the building of a relationship with every snot-nosed freshman who's approaching your school. So from the beginning, when they're first applying, you need to play a role. And I would argue at the levels that we're teaching, which is early childhood through high school, you want to be involved pretty intensely. You don't have to do every single step, but you really want to be a large part of what these people are seeing and connecting to. You want to have lots of other people in that process too, your parents that are interested, your associate head, got an admissions director, every single person from the front secretary on out. They're all tied in with building up the sense of what your school is. But don't delegate it. That's a serious mistake. People that know how to market do not necessarily know how to market a Montessori school. They think that if you make a sale, you're done. An important concept there would be to compare the kind of thing that goes on in a school when you're marketing to what goes on in a car dealership. If you're selling Mercedes-Benzes or whether you're selling Yugos, it doesn't matter what. You have people out there in the front. They do whatever they can to convince someone to buy. When somebody goes through the process of signing the papers and giving the cash or signing the documents to take out financing, they drive that car off the lot. You hope they'll come back and buy another car from you in a couple of years. You certainly care. You certainly would like them to come to you for service. You want them to refer their friends. All of that's important, but it's a totally different deal from what happens in a school. In a school, every single day you have an opportunity to offend a parent. In a school, every single day, no matter what your contract says, a parent can either turn around and sue you or walk away and say, try to sue me. You need to have parents who actually are going to stick with you in the good times and the bad, because, with the Mercedes, again, sooner or later it gets dirty, it gets dented, or somebody has buyer's remorse about how much they're paying every month, but they're stuck. They can't easily get out of it. In a school, people can get out of it. And even if it's at the end of the year, a Montessori child can never be replaced. The health of your school depends on building up a community of kids who start with you at 18 months or younger, certainly by age 3, and stay with you through age 18. Now, it doesn't mean you can't take in older kids. It's just that you're not doing a whole lot to change them at that point. You're not really involved in shaping the way their brains work. You got to take them where they're at. And it isn't just that issue. You're trying to build a community of kids who are growing up together. You're trying to build a community of parents who are raising their kids together. Every time a parent leaves, your school suffers, even if you can replace that kid with another kid. That's why we say a Montessori child can never be replaced. Doesn't mean we're telling you if you get an opening, you shouldn't look for somebody who's as close to an ideal Montessori kid at that age level that you can. It certainly wouldn't tell you to close the class down because you don't have enough kids to support it and you can't take any new ones in. I would tell you, don't assume because a kid's coming from another Montessori school that he is a Montessori kid. Lots of kids who went to Montessori schools are pretty awful. Do your own homework, double check what you're getting into, because again, once you let a kid into your school, it's difficult for most of us to get them out. It's not that it can't be done. It's like divorce. It just hurts. So you don't want to do that. So in marketing, you've got a bullseye. And because we don't have a lot of money to market, we've got to be smart. We got to be pinpoint accurate. That's just to make the phone ring. That has nothing to do with the actual process of recruitment. So marketing is just whatever you do to get people to know that your school exists, to have some idea of what it's like, to have some idea of what it costs so they don't call you up and argue with you about why are you so expensive or why are you not a charter school, why should they pay any money to you, or are you teaching the Bible if you're not a religious school. I mean, you need a clear identity. You've got to be pinpoint accurate. One of the reasons for that is very few of us have the time to invest in dealing with 100 phone calls a week, most of which are absolutely worthless. And you certainly can't just have them call and say, come on down and visit the school and give them a one-on-one hour-long meeting and tour. You need to figure out who are the people who are likely to fit your school, and those are the people you want to invite to come. And then I would suggest to you that you probably don't want to meet with them one-on-one in most cases. You want to meet with them in groups. So what we recommend is you do 1 or 2 morning open houses a week. When I say open house, I don't mean people just come in from 9 to 12 and they wander around the school and look around. That's not it at all. It starts at a specific time. It ends at a specific time. You can always choose to make more time if someone is worth meeting with longer one-on-one or in a small group. The idea is they ideally do not drag their children with them because it makes kids crazy to be dragged from school to school to school on the fantasy that the kid's reaction will tell the parent what to do. So I would counsel the parent, I realize you may not have childcare, but if you can, it would be good to have grandma or someone else watch him so that he's not confused by your process of doing initial visits to 20 different schools. It's just too much for little kids to take in. You do the homework. You figure out the 1, 2, 3 schools that you think are really perfect. And then that's where you have the child visit, you have the school look at the child, you see whether or not your instincts were right. That's a piece of advice that most parents really appreciate. So we've got to be pinpoint accurate. And if we do pinpoint accuracy, we don't get a parent showing up who's got 5 kids, 4 of whom are at the local Catholic school, and they've got this 3-year-old, and you know exactly what's going to happen when that kid hits 5. Now, I would suggest to you that in a world-class Montessori school, kids enter at age 3, ideally. Doesn't mean they always enter at age 3. and they stay for at least the 3-year cycle of early childhood. The reason for that is if you take in a 5-year-old, you are really going to suffer. Your class is not going to have the benefit of a mature, focused, orderly, concentrated child who knows how things work in Montessori. Can you take in the exceptional child? Of course you can. I don't think most rules should not be taken as absolute black and white, never violate them. But you don't want to make a habit of that. You want to get kids who come in as young as possible and from families that are as close to your ideal as you can. Doesn't mean when you're starting out and you don't have a lot of demand for your school that you're going to be as picky as you would ideally like to be, because one, you got to pay bills. Let's face it. And two, you really don't know yet. You're trying to figure this thing out. So what I would suggest to you is call them out. Again, try to imagine your teenage daughter, or try to imagine yourself when you were in college, sitting in some party, and there's all kinds of men coming up and they're hitting on you. Can I buy you a drink? Would you like to dance? Whatever. Generally speaking, they're people that you look at and you think, this guy looks creepy. You don't want to take the invitation from that one. There are people who really instantaneously you feel a connection to, and at least you're open to a conversation. And then there are people in the middle where you may or may not enter into a conversation because, no one else is coming up, and, may as well. It's not going to do any harm. It's just a drink. It's just a dance. And unless you get a sense that this person is really special or this person is really creepy, you may go out with them a few times. So dating is not a bad metaphor for what we do in admissions, because if the purpose of dating is not just to kill time and get a free dinner, but rather the goal is to try to learn more about yourself, about how to relate to other people, to figure out what makes you happy. What are you looking for in a family member, someone that you might literally build a family with? You're obviously going to kiss a lot of frogs along the way. That doesn't mean that you're only going to go out on a date with the perfect one. Maybe you'll be so lucky. But of course, in schools, we're talking about probably 100, 200, 300, 400 families. And if your threshold to survive is 50, you don't have to let in the creeps, but you'll probably take in some people that may stay with you a couple of years and send their kid to join his or her brothers and sisters at another school or public school or whatever. By the way, I just see that Stacy has written something. Let me take a look. Stacy writes, currently I'm touring individually with inquiring parents. You would suggest an open house first and then the invitation to tour. No, Stacy, I actually do open houses during the day when classes are in session. And the way I do it is very much what I just did with all of these principals that are here right now. So we've got principals and teachers who are here at Newgate because the Montessori Foundation International Montessori Council Conference starts tonight. So people arrived at 8:30. They came in. We had coffee and tea and pastries. I came in about 8:45, and Lorna and I began to speak with them in a circle. And I said, you're not coming to see a model school. This is not what we teach as a perfect school. And yet I think you're going to find you're going to learn a lot here. And whether you're a teacher or an assistant or a parent board member or someone who's thinking about starting a school or an associate head or a head, I think there's a lot to learn here in addition to seeing the classes. And then we proceeded to tell them the story about Newgate. So what I'm suggesting to you is we do it every Tuesday normally for anyone who wants to come. we ideally would like to know they're coming, but we're ready and willing to meet with anyone who shows up, whether it's 1 or 100, on any given Tuesday, every Tuesday of the year. Um, Again, we try to know who's coming, but it's no big deal. We're very open to it. There's normally two of us. I certainly can run them alone, and Lorna runs them alone, but we do like to have a couple of people. In the past, Lorna is the associate head here at Newgate. I could have just as easily done it with a parent association member. We don't actually have a parent association. We just have parents who are very active. We often say, please, if you're able, join us on a Tuesday, and we're happy to have 2 or 3 of you if you want. Some days there'll be some that are here, and some days there won't be anyone show up at all. And if that happens, we'll just sit and drink coffee and we'll talk ourselves. And so it's very, very loose. And we talk, we give people the kind of speech that I talked about earlier, and then we walk them around the school. And that's what's going on right now at Newgate. The principals and teachers are out there right now. There's various parents walking them around the school in clusters of 4 or 5 people. And that's how I would do it in a weekly open house. I would just take the 2 or 3 parents. Now, again, if you go through 8th grade or beyond, you're going to sometimes have someone show up with a toddler, and you're going to have someone who shows up with a 5th grader. And we treat them all just as graciously. So, if we can, we might split them up into 2 groups. But if we can't, we'll just say, okay, we're going to start. We'll start with the youngest because they tend to lose their focus and concentration the first, and then we'll move our way up through the school. Every visitor to Newgate sees every part of the school, in part because we're not that big. It's a 5-acre campus, so it's not huge. But we think it's important for a prospective parent to get a sense of the toddlers through the high school. And it's the high school kids that blow them away and make them want to be here, because those kids are extraordinary. And that's really one of the key messages we give out to people, is why it's so valuable to, even if you don't have it now, tell people flat out, it is our intention to keep growing 1 grade a year and to expand upwards through high school. Now, I'm not saying all of you need to do that, but that's what I would do. So Stacy and others, I let me know if I answered your question. Don't see anything appearing on the screen, so I'll just carry on until one of you has something to say. Defer. It's going to ask me when to defer to. I'll just cancel. Sorry, this is my automatic backup that just appeared on the screen. Stacy, I'm having audio trouble. I'm sorry. I wonder why. I am using a somewhat different microphone. Maybe I just need to be closer to it. Hold on a second. Stacy, is the audio any better now? And thank you for letting me know that you're listening, Stacy. And thank you for letting me know the audio is a little better. I just adjusted my microphone a bit. Okay. So again, please feel free to ask questions anytime. So why would families come to our school? Well, generally speaking, these are the kinds of things that parents will tell us all over the world. They either know this when they first come, or they discover it during the process of their early visits. They get the impression that if their kid goes to Montessori, one, he's going to be extremely well educated. Now, by that, I don't mean that he's going to have lots of textbooks and workbooks and hours of homework. A lot of people define well educated from that perspective. Our definition of well educated is culturally literate. He's going to know a lot of cultural literacy. He's going to know about his country. He's going to know about his culture. He's going to know about the government. He's going to know about economics. He's going to know about literature. In other words, this is going to be a kid that's interesting. And he's going to be very appealing at college because that's what most universities are looking for. Next, they really like the fact that Montessori kids become very independent. They want that responsibility and independence. In fact, they get frustrated when they get home and the kid is very passive and dependent and mommy, I can't do it. They want to know, how do I get my child to do what he does in school at home? That's where your parent ed comes in. Next, they really like the idea that Montessori kids are so incredibly self-confident and they think for themselves and they're compassionate and kind. I mean, that whole concept of no bullying and no nastiness and no violence, that really appeals to a lot of people. On the other hand, there are lots of people who believe in spanking their kids and nagging their kids and bribing their kids. I'll pay you $10 for every A. If you don't do this, you're not having a birthday party this year. If that's what parents believe works, then frankly, they're really not going to like your school if you're a Montessori school. On the other hand, there are plenty of schools that do that as a very, very deliberate matter of policy. They pay kids to behave. They pay kids to do their homework. They pay kids to get good grades. It works. It's just not our way. Clarity is the key to success. You got to figure out what kind of school you're running. Montessori is defined as not doing that. Enthusiastic, obviously, the fact that a kid wants to go to school, that he's joyful, these are big things with the average Montessori parent. By the way, if you don't watch it, a year or two into the relationship, they take that for granted. They assume either that was good when he was little, and it won't be good enough for when he's older, or it's really been wonderful, we so appreciate it, but now that he's 6 or 7, he needs more friends, he wants to play baseball, you just don't have all those opportunities, and they make trade-offs in their mind. It's really, really important to understand getting them in the door that's just the beginning. You've got to have a way to hold on to your kids. If you have enough money and you could start off with 500 kids, great. I'm not sure how Montessori would be, but it would certainly, that large population would make a difference. Same thing with facilities. If you could start off on day one with a swimming pool and a gym and athletic fields and a huge library and gorgeous classrooms, all that stuff. All of those things make it much easier to sell any school. On the other hand, most of us just don't have the money. We're not in an area where there's that big a population. So you've got to build it up slowly because you've got to build up a reputation. You've got to overcome people's objections, and you've got to hold on to people. You've got to keep them from leaving your school. What sort of family would want us? Well, typically, they don't just want us, they need us. The typical family that sticks with a Montessori school is usually a very successful parent, and they may be older. Now, older is relative, but they're probably not 20-year-olds. These are typically people in their 30s, 40s, 50s, sometimes 60s and above. They may be grandparents that have gotten custody of a child. They may be a gentleman who's married once or twice before, wants to do it, correctly this time. These are people who think for themselves, and that's an important concept. No matter how much you love Montessori, the average parent is hearing all kinds of good and bad things about Montessori. And it only takes one bad comment to undermine a parent's faith in a Montessori school. Enough to get them to go back to traditional education because that's safe. Nobody regrets sending their kid to a traditional school that's famous. The Harvards, the Princetons, the big private schools of every community, the ones on the hill where all the leaders of the community send their kids. Every town's got that kind of school. Usually that's not a Montessori school. So this has got to be a parent that doesn't care, that they're willing to make a decision for themselves, and they don't care what their friends think. They're typically affluent enough to afford our tuition and not resent it. On the other hand, many private schools are country clubs. And what I mean by a country club school is it's a place where you send your child because you can. It's a sign of your social status, of your income. It's like driving a very expensive car. You know, a car is just a way to get from point A to point B. You can argue that a $90,000 high-end Mercedes or BMW or Audi is really that much better than something else, but it's a lot of money. I mean, you can buy a house in a lot of communities for that much. So clearly what you need are people who aren't looking for a country club, because going to your school is not usually status. That doesn't mean they're not going to catch flack. What are you, crazy? You got money to burn? You're sending your kid to that silly Montessori school when we in our town have the best public schools in the world? You know, that's the typical thing parents hear. You got to have people that think for themselves and can afford it. And while we're at it, probably most of your best parents are only going to have one kid. Because let's face it, if you're charging enough money to do the job right, you're probably going to be charging somewhere between $10,000 and $20,000 a year. So try to imagine a family of four. There are people that can afford that, but that's a relatively small number of families. So don't be surprised if you don't get a lot of parents who only have one kid. That doesn't mean you don't take in people who have more. It just, don't be surprised that they pull out quicker. So what sort of family wants us? Well, they can afford it, and they're motivated to spend the money to give this child or these children something special. That means that in their minds, your school cannot be a commodity. You can't sell Montessori. Montessori sounds like a commodity, like KinderCare or the Goddard School or Primrose Academy. Those are national franchises like Burger King. You can't be like that. Montessori is different. And that difference from one school to the other really confuses people. They're buying your unique school. And it's got to be special. You really got to do something right. These are people who really value something extraordinary. And they value it enough that when they find it, they're willing to spend the money on it. They think of it as an investment. And lastly, you can pretty well predict these are parents who aren't going to talk about test scores and competition and how many hours of homework and how burdensome school needs to be. They want education to be fun because for them, education either was fun and they want it for their children, or education wasn't fun and they don't want their kids to have to go through that nonsense. They're also going to be likely to be people who are really interested in their child's emotional life, the values, and the spiritual development. That is very typical of what you see in a religious school. Many of the parents that will choose us could just as easily send their kids to a Jewish day school, a Catholic school, a Christian school, or whatever. Because, while they may or may not define emotional life, values, and spiritual development in terms of a particular religious tradition, they care about those things. And especially the ones who care about nonviolence, mental health, peace education. By the way, a lot of the people that care that stuff drive beat up old cars and wear beat up old clothes. So don't be surprised that you attract a whole lot of really terrific parents who can't begin to afford you. That's why I give a third of my tuition away to families who normally would never be able to come, but I know they're going to value us and add so much to the community. So again, it isn't just because they can't afford us we let them in. It's that we don't want people to feel that if they aren't wealthy, there's nothing to talk about. These are generally going to also be parents who want their kids to grow up free of self-doubt, free of stress, and free of senseless competition for approval from their friends. Think about a teenage girl who is typically so focused on what her friends think, what her friends are doing, what they're wearing, what they like. A typical Montessori kid tends to frankly have her own style and not be afraid to disagree with her friends. Doesn't mean she doesn't get defensive. She doesn't, get argumentative. She just says, look, guys, for me, it's not my style. Or I'm sorry, I'm not comfortable with what you're doing here. So generally speaking, these are parents that value that. And also, I have to tell you, these are generally not parents that are focused on getting into a good college. They assume their kids are going to get into a good college. They know that's not as hard as most people think. It's paying for it that's hard. Getting the money to afford the tuition or figuring out how to get the scholarships and financial aid, that's where you need to focus. Finding the right fit of college for your kid, that's hard. So these are people who have a much more realistic sense of how this all works than the average parent tends to have. And finally, the parent who is likely to like you is someone who values the idea of being part of a community of parents who share similar values. In fact, that's probably the most valuable thing about being in our schools that these parents experience. So, how do you describe your school's selling points and services? Everyone has different ways of doing it. There are many, many different Montessori schools and models. Some people really only want to run a boutique preschool. That's their thing. They stop at noon. They don't offer extended care. They just do an incredibly good job at what they do. Some people really focus on the look of the campus. They want the campus to be so incredibly gorgeous that it has as much appeal as the educational program. That certainly makes an awful lot of sense for any school. But for that kind of person, it's quite often a lot of money is put into buildings and grounds in comparison with the ed program. Some schools, parents are very, very involved. They may even be demanded. If you want to be here, you need to put in this many hours of volunteer time. Other schools, like what we do, what we say is nobody has to give any money and nobody has to donate any time. But we absolutely depend on your gifts, so don't misunderstand us. It's important, but we know that some of you will and some of you won't, and our job is to make you want to help us. And nobody has to get involved. But if you give us an inch, we'll suck you in so fast and so deep, you won't know what hit you. Next thing you'll know, you'll be spending most of your time here at this school. A number of colleges have bumper stickers that say something like, my child goes to West Point. My heart goes to West Point. My time goes to West Point, and every dollar, it seems, goes to West Point. We are part of the West Point community. That's an example of the way it typically looks. In some schools, children are really becoming very, very self-disciplined, very orderly, independent. In other words, what they're selling is the look of the idealized or normalized Montessori child. And that's real. Other people really press the idea that they offer full day programs and they have extended hours. So, how do you recognize the right families? Well, one thing you want to do is make sure you know who the competition is. You know, what are they, who are they, what do they have, where are they located, what are their programs, what are they charging? By the way, don't set your tuition on the basis of what other people in town charge. I mean, obviously you want to know it, but there's nothing wrong with saying we are the most expensive school in town and we're worth it. People often set their tuition at a level that the poorest parent they know can afford because they feel guilty about having to charge. We would urge you, don't feel guilty. Charge what it costs to do the job right. Other people really focus on the nature of the program, the unique things. For example, a bilingual Montessori school. What kind of parents do we see these days? A lot of them are exhausted. They're very, very involved. They're doing a lot of things. They need someone to help them raise their kids. Got a lot of people like this. They just, dad may travel a lot. There may be long commutes. They may have big mortgages. I mean, again, they're very, very typical people that we see. When we get parents in the school, we are getting not only the kid, we're getting the parents and we're getting grandparents, we're getting lots of people. So, while you don't have to do a DNA test on the child, you need to understand that you're doing more than just taking in one child. If the other kids are at other schools, that's going to affect how likely they are to stay at your school. And so I would say to you that we really want to help people to find the right fit. Now, we're beginning to run to the end of our hour, and I want to take a few minutes to talk about something that I don't have a slide for. So I'm going to make a slide. And I'm going to call it, I'm going to change this master to studio programs. Studio programs are one of the easiest things you can do to make your school seem more attractive to parents. So the typical school is open for young kids from 8 o'clock or 8:30 or 9 o'clock until 11:30, 12 o'clock or so. And then typically 3-year-olds and 4-year-olds go home. And the 5-year-olds may stay for an extra hour and a half. We would recommend that your school day be at least 6 hours long. That's actually because Dr. Montessori argued that if you don't have at least 6 hours with a kid, you probably aren't going to have the kind of impact you're really looking to have. You're trying to create a community where children really feel empowered and engaged. The second thing is we would recommend that you not have a non-Montessori program happen in the afternoon, nor that you make your 3 and 4-year-olds nap until 3 o'clock in the afternoon. Bottom line is, I'm now talking about early childhood. The reality is we're suggesting that you have all-day programs and that you design something that is Montessori all day. Now, studio programs are more oriented to elementary. So I'm going to write that down, more oriented to elementary and secondary. You'll get some 5-year-olds. Reason for this is, let's face it, the average early childhood child does not do well with change. They do better with consistency. That's why you don't run a non-Montessori program in the afternoon, because you undo the very work you did all through the morning. The idea of studio programs is studios are optional, no cost, after school clubs, classes, and activities. Hold on just a second. Come on in. Come in. Hi, Rob. Come in, sit. I'm just I'm on a live call. Studio programs typically run 3 sessions a year so that you get change. This is for variety. So you might have, fall, spring, winter, and spring. And normally you try to offer 4 to 10 studios using your own staff and volunteers. Whoops, not spelling that well. So I want you to try to visualize the idea of, cooking club, we call it PE extensions. We have all kinds of sports activities. We have a running club, chess club, you can envision lots of things you could do. Theater. These are the kinds of things that most people spend money on as during the day activities for children. In other words, they hire an art teacher, they hire whatever. Do these things as much as you can after school. Don't assume every child has to have everything all the time. Build opportunities for music and art and movement into your day-to-day program, whether it's early childhood or elementary or beyond, and enrich it with these after-school studios. Now, in your class, there is a article about studio programs. I'll double check to make sure it's there. It will be well worth you reading about. But I wanted to get across today, if you haven't already come across this idea, how incredibly useful studios are to making your school unique. One of the members of the class asked, how do you become really, really appealing to parents? Answer, there's a lot of things. The cheapest of all the things you could possibly do is learn how studio programs work and do them. They're not a complete solution for every single problem you'll ever face, but they are really, really important. We're now at 11:01. I just want to stop and ask if any of you have anything you want to jump in and ask or say. I'd say Stacy is heading out to a meeting. Is there anyone else? Not hearing anyone else speaking, I will say that this has been a great session from my end. I hope you found it useful too. We'll call this week.
I have a question, Tim, before you go.
Hi, how are you?
Good. So how do you turn people down? Like if you know somebody is not the right fit for you, how do you do it so that it doesn't create a problem with other families?
Oh, well, I don't have a good slide for that one, but here's the answer. The first thing is you have to understand that you must not be treated like a health club. In a health club, you walk into a health club facility, somebody gives you a tour. If you like it, you sign up on the spot. And you decide, what level of membership you want and how, some of them make you join for a year. Some of them will let you go week to week, month to month. You don't want to behave that way. You are not that kind of program. Second, because a parent shows up at your door, they are not guaranteed admission. You have the right to choose just like they do. You don't have to be nasty about it. And the way I would do it is I'd say, look, our school is really, really different. It's not going to be the right fit for every child. It's not going to be the right fit for every parent. We know that. What we're doing together is to try to help each other get to know who you are, who your child is, not in this one brief meeting. This is the first date. And before we ask you to apply, before we have your child come and visit, before we do anything, we want to do whatever we can to help you to figure out, as the parent, is this likely to be the right fit for you and your husband and for your child? Keep in mind, we're looking for a long-term relationship. This is not a 1 year at a time enrollment. If that's what you're looking for, you're actually better off to keep looking, because we're not going to give you what you want. And we're not looking to turn people down. This is not whether you're good enough for us. It's whether or not we're the right fit for each other. And you're really leading that process. If it's not the right fit for you as a mom or a dad, then that's it right there. But we look at this from all sides. We're certainly looking too, and we're just trying to figure out whether we're the right match for each other. Did I answer your question?
Yes. What if they think they are the right fit and you don't?
You have the right to say, well, with all due respect, I don't agree. You also don't have to tell them why you're turning them down. I mean, one of the things that most schools do is to say, I want to let you know that our school receives many applications, and I wish that we had room for everybody. We're doing several things. We're looking for children who are going to blossom. We're looking for parents who we feel are the right fit. And of course, we only have so many spots. And so what we try to do, rather than tell you apply today and we're going to admit kids in the order in which they apply, what we're going to do is, if you're interested, we'll take a look at this together, and we'll try to make this process be as comfortable and as quick as we can, but it takes time. We're going to get references on your child. We want his academic records. I don't care if he's a toddler. We want to talk to the babysitter. We want to talk to the nanny. In other words, we're doing due diligence. There's admissions evaluation, which usually includes a developmental screening or some kind of test or evaluation. There's a visit to the school. And again, this is different at every age level. I mean, toddlers usually come in at the end of the day after school, and they meet with the toddler faculty, with the mom and child and the faculty. It's the parent. We put 90% of our focus on the parent. The assumption is that if, not every child is right for our school, but 90% of what we're focused on is the parent the right fit for the school? And we make that very clear. It's a two-way decision. And, usually I almost never have to turn someone down. They almost always figure it out on their own. I don't normally have to say no, but I'm ready to do it if I have to. And of course, sometimes, if someone says, I don't think my kid had a fair visit, I feel like he had a bad day, or, we try to be very gracious and say, let's have him come back and let's look at it again. We want the same thing you want. We want a school where your child's going to be really happy. We want kids are going to blossom here. We want parents are really going to be happy here. We all want the same thing. This is not about, are you brilliant enough for our school? It's whether or not we're the right fit. And there are times, think of it again like dating. There are times when somebody is dating and you simply have to say, I really don't think this is a good match. I think we need to stop seeing each other. And
if you're dating, by the third day you can quit with with a parent, once you enroll them, you're sort of stuck with them.
Well, you're not stuck, but you're right. It's hard to get them out. And that's one of the things that I say is the same thing. You know, that this is a decision that we're going to both make, and we're going to make it together. And I don't, and they can say, my husband's a world famous brain surgeon and he's only available 1 day a year, and you're going to have to do this without him. And he's off in Beijing, and, you know, and we would say, when your husband is able to come in, we're more than happy to go to the next step in the process. In other words, we're gracious, but we don't bend. And we really do take our time. And if we get a sense that a parent is obnoxious, we just graciously say, you know what? It doesn't feel to us like it's a good fit.
Okay. Okay, yeah, the problem we're facing right now is that our kindergarten, like our feeder school, has been enrolling kids halfway through the year. I mean, we're in November, and there's a couple kids that had started just now. And they seem to have behavioral problems, but I think they're being sent from other schools.
Well, you remember, I said this to you just yesterday, that, you know, one of the issues is this feeder school relationship. You're going to have to really look at that.
Right. No, but I can see what the problem is there, but obviously I'm seeing it from an outside perspective. My kid is in kindergarten, and they're enrolling these kids that have behavioral issues. So obviously me as a parent, I'm like, well, how are you doing that? Like, do you just need to pay your bills? Well, you're ruining the whole...
You're in a unique situation because you're in partnership with another school, or at least you're contemplating that. And when you set yourself up where kids think they have an automatic right to move up to your school, I would never do that.
Oh, no, they don't. They definitely don't. No, I was just wondering, like, what caused these kids to get enrolled when he clearly wasn't a fit?
Oh, well.
But it's probably the lack of that they don't have enough money to pay the bills.
Yeah, that's the answer, is that either the head of school didn't see things the way you see it as a parent. That's possible. In other words, they just didn't look that closely. A lot of parents don't. Or if they're taking, are these 5-year-olds?
Yes.
So just the fact that they're enrolling a 5-year-old in the middle of the year, that would scare the devil out of me. I mean, it's not that I've never done it. I've done it, and I've always known that I'm going to pay for it. Sometimes it works out, but quite often it doesn't. And because
I think they think they can fix them. I think that's the problem.
Many people in Montessori have that fantasy. Montessori will make you free. It will change you forever. To a large extent, that is just propaganda. If you get them in at 2 or 3, you can work with a very wide range of kids. Master teachers who are running an extremely well-normalized classroom can often work with a much more extreme range, but even they can't do it for everybody. But they might be able to do it for 1, but they might not be able to do it for 2, or they might be able to do it for 2, but not for 3, or they might be able to do it for a kid that has this manifestation, but not someone who is violent to another kid. You know, you got to look at each situation as an administrator very carefully, or before you know it, you have a mass exodus of parents out of the school because they're sick and tired of having their kids' education interfered with by others. And more importantly, they lose faith in the integrity of the administration of the school. We've all been there. I've had that happen to me, and it is very, very embarrassing and unpleasant. And as you said, once they're in the school, it's not that you couldn't get rid of them. It's just divorce is painful. You don't want to do that. It's much better to do this in the admissions process. So hopefully one of the things that will happen is that your school will influence the other school to become more and more like what we describe as world class. To us, is just common sense. This is the way you ought to do things. But again, when people are up against the wall financially, you compromise. And a lot of people justify it, as you said, on the theory that I can save him. And we're all vulnerable to that. Everyone.
Okay.
Okay?
Yes, this answers a lot of questions.
Good. All right. Well, thanks so much. It was great talking to
Thank
you.
you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Mhm.